Hey, this is Anney, and welcome to Stuff I Never Told You, a production of iHeartRadio. And yes, it's me, still flying solo. But Samantha is around. She will be back. Hopefully she is on vacation. Although this one I'm recording a bit preemptively, I guess, just in case to have, because it's an evergreen topic. It's just been on my mind. And it goes along with the theme we've been talking about, which is disaster movies, and especially 90s disaster movies. But, okay, so today, for this sub segment of fictional women around the world, we are talking about Dr. Jo Harding, who's from the 1996 movie Twister. I loved this movie as a kid. I loved it so much. I sought out other Helen Hunt movies, like movies that would have never interested me, because I loved her so much in this movie. And I briefly toyed with being a storm chaser, as did like a lot of people in my age group. But the reason I was thinking about it is one of the most amazing things I saw at DragonCon this year. I actually didn't see it, but I saw it through someone else's clips, social media, was a reenactment of a scene from Twister, a dramatic scene, and it involved cows, it involved a flailing tornado, it involved some pretty decent accents and acting, and I loved it. It was one of the funniest things I saw. And so I wanted to talk about this. And this movie, I do watch it probably once a year. It always makes me want steak and eggs, and it reminds me of the incredibly dramatic and now defunct ride at Universal Studios, which I'm about to go to. So that's another reason I've been thinking about it. That and The Mummy, which I hope that ride doesn't. I keep hearing rumors they're getting rid of it. I hope that's not true. But you can find YouTube clips of the Twister ride. It's very dramatic. It's full of amazing quotes. Me and my friends used to quote it back to each other all of the time. You basically kind of walked through this thing and learned about tornadoes, and then you'd walk through sets and you'd see destroyed houses, and then at the end, like, you'd see the cows fly in front of you and something would spark and catch fire and fall over. It was sort of a kind of stand and watch ride, I guess. But I liked it. Apparently, there is a sequel coming out in 2024 called Twisters. I'm very interested about that. Okay, yes, let's get into this one. This one will probably be a bit shorter. So this does go in tandem with our conversations we've been having around Dr. Ellie Sattler from Jurassic Park and Evie from The Mummy. But in the 90s, there was a bunch of your kind of science intelligible women, which sounds so condescending, but there were usually movie magic science, at least somewhat in these movies, because I have heard a lot of pretty bracing critiques of the science of this particular movie. And one was Helen Hunt's Dr. Jo Harding, the meteorologist at the center of the 1996 film Twister. I also want to say I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about another character I want to do that was pretty important to me during this time, who was in the field of science. Sam Carter from Stargate, played by Amanda Tapping. And I do want to talk about her, but I try not to have too many. Well, they're all white women with blonde hair and blue eyes, so I try to space that out a little bit. I'm not saying that they weren't important, but it is important also to keep that in mind. So just a note about that, because I'm trying to fill in for some stuff while Samantha's out. I'm doing these somewhat easier for me topics, but just a note about that. And also this movie, a couple notes about this movie, because it does have a few notable things to it. It made a lot of money. It got a few Oscar nominations. I mean, mostly like sound and effects, but still got some Oscar nominations. I don't want to, that sounds like I'm saying those aren't worth it, but they are. But just to specify, it has a museum in Wakita where a lot of the movie takes place. I almost got the chance to go once, but then we couldn't do it. And it was the first film to be released on DVD in the US, from what I read. It was in part written by Joss Whedon, but he left at multiple points due to illness and then marriage. Laura Dern, Ellie Sattler was originally going to play this role. A bunch of other big actors, too. Jan de Bont directed it, and he was, by most accounts, difficult to work with. He insisted it be filmed in Oklahoma instead of on a soundstage because it might be the last great action film not filmed on a soundstage. That's paraphrasing, but that's basically what he said. And there were a lot of injuries. Helena Hunt and Bill Paxton were both temporarily blinded by a special effect. They both had to get hepatitis shots after filming in unsanitary conditions. Hunt allegedly got a concussion from being so exhausted from the shoot and hitting her head. There's actually 2 instances where she might have gotten a concussion. De Bont said basically, "Oh, I love her, but she's clumsy." And Hunt replied, "Clumsy? The guy burned my retinas, but I'm clumsy. I thought I was a good sport." I don't know ultimately if Jan chalks me up as that or not, but one would hope so. Yeah, it's pretty... Sounds like she's got a pretty good point there. Crew members left the production because they felt de Bont was out of control. He apparently hit a camera assistant out of frustration, and others were injured on set too. So it just sounded like it was not very safe working conditions. And when we think about what people are fighting for in the strike and the writer's strike and the actor's strike and what has happened before on sets, like, it's important. It's important. All right, let's break down this character and the plot. It's a fairly simple plot. It starts with Jo as a child losing her father during a tornado, an incident that drove her to pursue a career in meteorology with the main goal of improving the warning system when it comes to tornadoes. To that end, she leads a scrappy group of storm chasers, a group that used to include her ex-husband, Bill Harding, played by Bill Paxton, who returns with his new girlfriend, therapist Dr. Melissa Reeves, to get Jo to sign the divorce papers. When he arrives, she shows him Dorothy, which is this design that they came up with together that essentially was going to release sensors into the heart of the tornado to get accurate readings that will help them understand and predict tornadoes. However, someone would have to get close to the tornado to deploy it. An incoming tornado distracts them before Jo can sign the divorce papers, and she and the team rushes away. And Bill and Melissa follow because they realize she hasn't signed the papers. They also encounter their fancy city rivals who have more funding. Tornado chasing wise. Through some circumstances, Bill and Jo end up sheltering under a bridge and Jo's truck gets destroyed. Bill reluctantly agrees to lend her his truck. Many tornado chases ensue. Melissa is more and more concerned about this lifestyle. They visit Jo's aunt in Wakita for food, and she nudges Jo, implying that she and Bill are still in love. She's sort of like, maybe you should think about this, think about getting back together. Melissa learns about Jo's past with tornadoes, and then they go to chase another tornado and try to deploy Dorothy, but it's knocked over. All the sensors fall out. And Bill tries to get Jo to retreat with him, but she is determined. And the whole thing builds up into a fight over her motivations, about her father's death, over why they broke up, which is all broadcast over walkie-talkies for Melissa to hear, the whole team, but Melissa. And this is where the quote that I got to see, this whole scene is what they were reenacting at Dragon Con. "You've never seen it miss that house and miss this house and come after you." They did it way better, but so after this happens, they're staying in a small town to repair their vehicles. Jo signs the divorce papers. Another tornado hits while they're watching The Shining. And there's a lot of legends behind this, actually. And then the tornado heads towards Jo's aunt in Wakita. So there's kind of this moment of like, well, what are you going to do? Where are you going to go, Bill? And Melissa and the relationship between her and Bill is basically like, this life is not for me, but maybe you and Jo can work it out. And he goes with Joe to rescue her aunt, who is injured, and says that they barely had any warning. Through her yard decorations, they are inspired to modify their Dorothy design just as a weather prediction informs them a huge tornado is probably going to come through. And it does, a huge tornado, an F5. And despite debris of all kinds, driving through houses, explosions, the death of their competitors, their fancy city competitors, and a truly unbelievable end scene, they deploy Dorothy, they get the data, they kiss. It missed that house, and it missed that house, and it came after them. So that's pretty much it. But I did love it. There are a couple of things when I was thinking about this I picked up on. One is, we've talked about this before, but sort of that trend of giving women in what is seen as a more masculine space a masculine name. So Jo being that. And she's pretty, I mean, she wears very sensible clothes for the field she's in. She has plenty of instances where she gets very, very dirty. And it's not seen as like, this isn't her place. This isn't where she should be. Similar to Ellie, what we talked about in that Jurassic Park episode. But that being said, there's also Melissa, Bill's fiance, later not fiance, ex-fiance. She's the foil to Jo. She's the kind of uptight city woman who is definitely the butt of a lot of jokes that she doesn't like. This is way too much like fatty food on my plate, or I don't want to get dirty, or I don't want to do this or do this. She does have some instances where like she drives that truck, she dodges his debris, she's screaming the whole way, but I think that's fair. She's also mocked for being a therapist, which the 90s was all about that. We talked about that in our Sex and the City episodes. But I do think that she has a good moment where she doesn't hate Jo. Jo doesn't hate her, but she just sort of realizes it isn't going to work. She is often played as a joke, but is sort of humanized in that way, but also sort of dismissed. Like she's very clearly a plot point to get them back together. I guess I just like that they weren't pitted against each other so much of trying to get Bill Paxton. It felt like there wasn't any animosity between them, and it was more about him figuring out what he really wanted and her kind of realizing like, oh, if that's truly what you want, then that's not what I want. I do think it's also supposed to be sort of a commentary on Bill Paxton's character wanting to go corporate as a weatherman on TV, and the more rough like countryside of being in the field. So Melissa versus Jo. I have read a lot of stuff recently that I'm interested to come back to about the trope of the good divorced husband. I think there's a lot to unpack there, but just a note about that. And then also, yeah, women in STEM, as unrealistic as this may have been, I was into it. I was like, oh, well, maybe this is what I want to do. And she seemed so competent. And she wasn't really sexualized to me. So I just remember thinking like, oh, that'd be cool. I could go out and do this and this and this. Again, not realistic. Quite dangerous. Don't do it unless you know what you're doing. But yeah, it was an important character to me. So if you want, you can find that video I've been mentioning that I saw at DragonCon. It's amazing and I recommend it. But in the meantime, yes, this is what I have to say about it for now. If you would like to send your suggestions in, you can. Our email is stephaniemomstuff@iheartmedia.com. You can find us on Twitter at momstuffpodcast and on Instagram and TikTok at Stuff Mom Never Told You. We have a TeePublic store. We also have a book that you can order now at stuffyoushouldreadbooks.com. Thanks as always to our super producer Christina, our executive producer Maya, and our contributor Joey. And thanks to you for listening. Stuff Mom Never Told You is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, you can check out the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.